A Place to Hang the Moon. First Chapter Friday Read Aloud video with the Word Nerd and author interview with Kate Albus. Today, as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down word by word and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Stay all the way to the end to see if you've written it down correctly. Check out the links in the description box for some student engagement worksheets to use with these videos. I have one for each First Chapter Friday video on my channel. They'll be a great way to help your students focus on what's being read and stop them from zoning out. And one more thing before we dive into Chapter 1, I want to give a quick shout out to Mrs. Mass's 7th graders at Caspina Middle School. Thanks so much for being here today, you guys. Happy reading. I hope you enjoy this First Chapter Friday video. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week, I'm going to be reading to you from A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. Now, I know that I tell you guys that I love the books that I share with you, but I really love this one. It made my heart happy, and I can tell you 3 reasons why. Number 1, I love the characters in this story. They feel so real, they're just like they're real people, and I really know them in real life, and I love that about them. I also love that it takes a familiar plot or setting or situation, which is children being evacuated from London during World War II, and it puts a twist on it. So it's like a story I'm familiar with, but I haven't heard before. And then finally, I also really, really love that the author, name drops books throughout the entire thing. And so, as a word nerd, as a book lover, I love hearing about what books the characters are reading. I'm going to read you the blurb so that you know a little bit more about this amazing book. Then I'll read you chapter 1, and perhaps even better than all of this goodness is the fact that we're going to get a chance to talk with the author after that. So, here is what this story is about. William, Edmund, and Anna aren't terribly upset by the death of their not-so-grandmotherly grandmother, who has taken care of them since their parents died. But the children do need a guardian. And in the dark days of World War II London, those are in short supply, especially if they hope to stay together. Could the mass wartime evacuation of children from London to the countryside be the answer? It's a preposterous plan, but off they go, keeping their predicament a secret and hoping to be placed in a temporary home that ends up lasting forever. Moving from one billet to another, the children suffer the cruel trickery of foster brothers, the cold realities of outdoor toilets, and the hollowness of empty stomachs. They find comfort in the village lending library, whose kind librarian, Nora Müller, seems an excellent choice, except that her German husband's whereabouts are currently unknown, and some of the villagers consider her unsuitable. Set against the backdrop of World War II England, A Place to Hang the Moon is a story about the dire importance of family, the one you're given and the one you choose. All right, let's dive right in to chapter 1. Funeral receptions can be tough spots to find enjoyment, but 11-year-old Edmund Pierce was doing his best. He was intent on the ice buns. Some of them had gone squashy on one side or the other, some had lost their icing when a neighboring bun had been removed, and a few had been sadly neglected in the icing department to start. Undaunted, Edmund picked through the pile, finding 2 that met his approval. He shoved one into each of his trouser pockets and, scooping up a handful of custard cream cookies to round out the meal, navigated through the crowd until he found a vacant armchair. There he settled, quite content despite the occasion. It helped that he never really cared much for his grandmother anyway. On the other side of the room, Anna Pierce sat cross-legged on the floor between a corner cabinet and a brocade settee. The settee's occupants didn't notice the 9-year-old tucked under the weighty scroll of its arm. Anna had nearly finished Mary Poppins, and she preferred its company to that of the unfamiliar elderly ladies perched on the settee, or any of the other guests, really. Like her brother, Anna had managed to find enjoyment at the funeral reception. Also, like her brother, Anna felt very little grief at her grandmother's passing. William Pierce, the eldest of our threesome, made his way through the throng, thanking people for coming. He had spent a particularly long while with the vicar, who was quite deaf. Everything had to be repeated before the dear man understood, and this took some time. William was cross and tired. The corners of his mouth felt tight with smiling. But funeral receptions, after all, were not events to be enjoyed, even when one didn't miss one's grandmother. William glimpsed the toe of Anna's shoe by the corner cabinet. He smiled, his first real smile that day. Crossing the room and nodding to the elderly ladies on the settee, he nudged Anna's foot with his own. She looked up from her book and smiled back at him. William crouched low and squeezed in between the furniture to join his sister. It was a tight spot, and none too comfortable for a tallish boy of 12, but this is what one does when one loves his sister very much, especially when one hasn't any parents who might make themselves uncomfortable on behalf of the children. William eyed the slim handful of pages remaining in Anna's book. Last chapter? Anna marked her spot with the hair ribbon and nodded. Mary Poppins has gone away, and the children are so sad. William pulled Anna close. Is the reception nearly over? She asked. Nearly. William surveyed the crowd. People are starting to leave. They've got to get home before the blackout. Where's Edmund? William sighed. The last I saw, he was taunting the vicar. Anna's eyes went wide. Taunting? Standing behind him, trying to figure out how loud he had to shout before the vicar noticed he was there. Oh dear. I should find him. William squeezed Anna's shoulder. Stay here. Finish your book. Anna took her brother's hand. I'll come with you. I'd rather finish it in bed tonight. With that, the pair of them began to search for their brother in the crowded room. This took quite a while, as they were stopped at every turn by well-dressed strangers wishing to list their grandmother's many fine qualities. Anna found herself collecting words along the way. Principled, dignified, formidable. She wasn't entirely certain what formidable meant, but it sounded like forbidding, which was a word that described their grandmother quite nicely. Certainly more so than a word like grandmotherly. Thank you, sir, she heard William say as he shook the hand of a brittle-looking man in a gold-buttoned jacket. You're right, sir. She was formidable, sir. William spied Edmund in the armchair. He was tossing bits of cookie into the air and catching them, most of them, in his mouth. William excused himself from the gold-buttoned man and pulled Anna along behind him. The pair reached Edmund just as a piece of custard cream bounced off his chin and skidded across the floor to lodge itself against the base of a standing lamp. William put his hands on his hips. Must you, Edmund? Edmund grinned. There were only boring cookies left. You've got to do something with them to make them interesting. Anna eyed the piece by the lamp. I like custard creams. She thought it was a shame to waste them, even if there hadn't been a war on, which, in fact, there was. William scowled at Edmund's feet. Edmund, put your shoes back on. Why? Because guests are leaving. We've got to see them out. I'm in my own house. Why do I have to wear shoes? Just, William retrieved his brother's shoes from the floor. Please, Edmund. Edmund grunted his indignation, but took the shoes. As the children waited for Edmund to do up his laces, they caught snippets of conversation here and there. Lovely sermon, a woman in a blue suit said, twice, to the vicar. Blasted Germans, a ruddy-faced man grunted as he made his way toward the door. If only they weren't rationing bacon, said a plump woman, being helped into her jacket by an even more plump woman. Whatever is to be done about the children? This last came from the dining room. William, Anna, and Edmund exchanged glances. They recognized the voice of their elderly housekeeper, Miss Collins. They could hear no more of her conversation, but they didn't need to. They were only too aware that nobody had yet come up with the answer to the question, what was to be done about the children? At the moment, however, there was no time to dwell on this rather terrifying unknown, as a heavily ringed hand landed on Anna's shoulder. I'm sorry for your loss, children. Your grandmother was a paragon, as you no doubt know. Thank you, ma'am, Anna said. Anna didn't know the ringed woman. She also didn't know what paragon meant, but thought it sounded rather like pagoda, but that couldn't be right. She noted silently that the woman smelled of mothballs. Yes, thank you, William said, recoiling with some dismay as he saw Edmund remove an iced bun from his pocket. His pocket! And shove it into his mouth hole. The ringed woman looked to Edmund for his response. It was perhaps for the best that his mouth was filled with iced bun, for it made his answer most unintelligible. The woman raised her eyebrows in distaste and brushed a spray of crumbs from her lapel. She carried on toward the front door, muttering something about the world and what it was coming to. Charming, Ed, William said. Edmund swallowed the last of the bun. She was a miserable old cow, and you know it. Why must we all of a sudden pretend to have adored her? It's what people do, Anna said. Yes, but why? Anna considered this, but could find no sense in it. Frankly, she was preoccupied with hunger and a bit jealous of Edmund for having got the last of the custard creams. She picked out a finger sandwich from the buffet and nibbled it, wishing it were a cookie. As the door was closed on the last of the guests, Miss Collins appeared and asked the three of them to join her in the dining room. There she lowered herself into a chair. You'll remember, children, that your grandmother's solicitor, Mr. Ingersoll, will be here early tomorrow? William, Edmund, and Anna knew the meeting with the solicitor was to be about their futures. Somehow the word always sounded capitalized when the adults said it, and all three felt rather sick at the bleak uncertainty. For June of 1940 was, even for those who had not recently become orphans, a time of most uncertain futures. The country's worst fears about Mr. Hitler had been realized the previous fall when war with Germany had been declared. While no bombs had yet been dropped on London, the overheard conversations of adults suggested that it was only a matter of time. William smiled a stalwart sort of half smile. Edmund looked at the floor, and the sides of Anna's nose were beginning to go pink, warning of oncoming tears. Miss Collins, she whispered, can't you just stay on with us? Don't be daft, Edmund said. She's ancient. William grimaced. Ed. Miss Collins laid a wizened hand on William's. Children, how I wish such a thing could be. I'm afraid, though, that an old bird like me, she directed a smile at Edmund, is in no position to become a mother to anyone. But we don't need a real mother, Anna said, only a hint of whine creeping into her voice. We just need someone to watch us when we're home from boarding school at the holidays. We wouldn't be any bother. Her eyes darted briefly toward Edmund. Truly, we wouldn't. William thought about hushing his sister, but the fact was that he had wished for precisely the same thing she did. Indeed, if he was to be honest about his heart's desire, he wished for more. He wished Miss Collins would volunteer to be a mother to the three of them. He wished she would stop Edmund from sneaking sweets after dinner. He wished she would read Anna, all of them come to that, stories at bedtimes and tuck in the covers about their necks before saying sweet dreams and switching off the lamp. He wished she would praise him for his top marks in history. He wished she would take him in her bonny old arms and tell him she'd be in charge and he needn't worry any longer. Truth be told, he'd wished all of this for a very, very long time, though he knew the housekeeper's job was cleaning and cooking and not tucking in and hugging. Miss Collins dug in her apron and produced a spotless handkerchief. She dabbed at her nose, now gone pinker than Anna's. I'm afraid there's nothing for it, children. She gripped William's hand. What you need is a proper guardian. She faltered, gave a sniffle. And while I wish things were different, that's more than I'm, she sniffled again. That's more than I'm able to give you. With that, she rose and fled through the doorway to her own quarters as quickly as her aged bones would carry her. And that's where we're going to stop for today. But if you want to know what happens to the three Pierce siblings when they do leave London and what ends up happening with their family and the war and all the things, you're definitely going to want to pick up a copy of A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. But now, before we do any of that, we're going to go and talk with the author. All right, readers, we're in for a real treat today because we are here with the author of our First Chapter Friday book this week, A Place to Hang the Moon, Kate Albus. Kate, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is so lovely. I so appreciate being invited.
Yeah, I'm excited to ask you 5 questions, so I'm just going to jump right in. And the first one is that the premise of the story is one that, it seems to have been told before. Like at first I was like, bed knobs and broomsticks. Like I love that movie as a kid, like the evacuees from London. But you told it in your own way. And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of talk about if someone feels like a story has already been told, why there's still value in retelling it your own way.
That's a great question. And I don't think it's one I've ever been asked before. Absolutely. The World War II evacuations in England it's something I've always been fascinated by. As a kid, I couldn't have imagined being sent away to live with strangers. As an adult, as a mom, I couldn't fathom sending my own kids away. And so it's always been this extraordinary historical event that honestly, I think you probably could write about 1 million stories about. And for me, I'd probably be very happy to only ever write books about finding a family. So for me, it was an opportunity to take this really awful historical event where kids were separated from their families and turn it a little bit sideways, in the sense that the children in this story are actually hoping to find a forever family. So I think that marriage of a historical event that's holds endless fascination for me, and the opportunity to write a found family story was what motivated me.
Yeah. Great. I shared in the intro when I was reading the first chapter with the listeners, that I love books that mention books, that name drop books throughout the whole thing, and yours definitely does that. And I'm curious about your process for picking which books you chose to share. Like, did you have a list, or like were there like research? Like, tell us a little bit about it.
It was so fun. Honestly, that was one of the most fun parts of writing the book and researching the book. Although I'll tell you that as someone who doesn't, I don't use an outline when I'm writing. I kind of get started with a premise and just figure it out as I'm going. And this, A Place to Hang the Moon, while it became this book about books, it really didn't start out that way. It wasn't until honestly, until, without giving anything away, a scene when the children in the story are they're lost, physically lost, and wandering around a village trying to find the school that they're supposed to go to. And as they're lost and wandering, I suppose I was also lost and wandering. And the thought occurred to me, this story needs a library and a heroic librarian and books. So then finding those books was really, really fun. I'm a big research person at heart. And so looking first at what books had been published in
Yeah.
1940, specifically what books had been published in England in 1940, what books seemed like the kind of books that bookish kids would have been reading back then. And the whole process was really fun. I can tell you that there were some sort of last minute substitutions. At one point I was looking for a book with really good food scenes. And one of the books that I always associate with really good food scenes is Laura Ingalls Wilder's Farmer Boy.
Yeah.
So it was originally a food scene in there because those books were published, at least in this country, in the US, in the 30s. And so I figured, great, they were available in 1940, but somewhere along the line, I found out that those books were not published in England until the 50s. So that food scene got switched out for a food scene involving the wind and the willows. So
Yeah, well, and some people might not have known that Laura Ingalls Wilder's books were not in England in that time period, but for the person who did, like that would have pulled them out of the story. And so that is why it's so important to get that research correct. So bravo for going the extra mile.
well, thank you.
The second thing, if I had to pick two things that I love the most about this book, it would be the book name mentioning, but also the characters. I just fell in love with these characters, the kids and the adults, and they just felt so real. They felt like kids that I would encounter, in a school, or, where my kids hang out. So I'm wondering if you have any tips to share with maybe writers who are listening, one thing that you can give advice on how to make your characters feel real.
I appreciate your saying that, first of all, just because I agree. I definitely read books because of their characters, and I think I write books because of characters as well. There's a grown-up writer named Mary Doria Russell who I once heard speak, and she said that in order for her to, because writing a book takes a while, you have these characters sort of living in your head for, sometimes a year or more. And that in order for her to let characters live in her head for a year, she has to fall in love with them. She has to love them in order to spend that much time with them. And for me, I think a big part of what makes a character relatable and makes a character someone that I can fall in love with is showing their vulnerability, whatever that may be. Finding ways to show what are the things that they fear, what are the things that they yearn for, what are the things that they're maybe a little bit ashamed of about themselves. Those sort of like, I like to think of it like their soft underbelly, that makes you relate to them as humans.
That's good. That's so good. And sometimes, we just want to talk about the good things of our characters. And so showing some of those vulnerabilities, like that's something that we might not think about right from the outset. So I think that's a great tip. Habits. Can you tell us about your writing space, your writing schedule? Like, do you write a certain time of the day? Do you have to have snacks? Are you a hand writer, a typer? Like, when you sit down to work on a book, what does that look like for you?
I think it's changed as I from the time that I first started doing this. I first started writing when my kids were in elementary school, and early on, I felt like in order to really get into the groove of getting lost in that imaginary world, I needed these gigantic swaths of time. So I would write while my kids were at school, when I could just be lost in it for hours at a time. And then the pandemic happened and my kids were at home, and I found that I needed to figure out a way to sort of write in the cracks, if that makes sense. I make up that phrase. I have a friend who talks about writing in the cracks. So I feel like I've sort of adapted over the years to just make it work in whatever the circumstances are. I'm not super picky about where I write. I usually write right here in this room that I'm at, this desk that I'm talking to you from. But I can write very happily in a coffee shop or something, like with white noise going on behind me. And I'm not I love snacking, but I don't particularly do it while I'm writing. I sort of save it for after, I guess.
Yeah, your reward for getting done.
Yeah. And I wish that I were a hand writer person. I envy people that have those beautiful writer notebooks that are, sort of artistically done, and I would love to be that kind of writer. I feel like in my heart, I wish I were that kind of writer, but I also write really slowly by hand. And I find that as someone who doesn't work from an outline and who just sort of figures it out as they go along, I do type really quickly. So I find that typing helps me sort of get the thoughts out of my head faster than writing would.
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that. And I don't often talk about myself being a writer on this channel, but I'm the exact opposite. I handwrite because I can type faster than I can think. And it's a lot of like stop start when I'm typing. But when I'm handwriting, I like know what the next sentence is before I'm done with the one that I'm on. So it feels more like a flow. So it's, everybody's got their own way, and you just got to find what works for you. So
Do you work
thank
in
you.
beautiful notebooks?
I've got a stack of them just like off to the other side over here. And my favorite part is holding it. Like, I made this, I wrote these words. Like, this is a tangent, but there's this creator, his name is Austin Kleon, and he weighs his notebooks when he first starts and when he finishes. And like, he tapes a lot of stuff in and glues, and like, there's a lot of art there too. But like, I just wonder if like the ink weighs something, like you just made more.
Oh, I'm dying to know. Oh man, that story
Yeah.
alone might convert me to using notebooks. I'm jealous. That's
It's
fantastic.
okay. Everybody's got a process. My last question for you is that when I was reading your bio, you shared that you started working on this book and you didn't tell anybody for a really long time. And part of the reason you didn't tell anybody is that you shared you were kind of scared. Like, you didn't really want people to know you were working on this thing until you knew it was going to work out. Um, And then once you'd had pizza for dinner too many times, you said you fessed up to your kids. What advice would you have for somebody else who might be in that same position of like, I am a writer, but I'm shy. I don't know if I want to tell anybody. What would you say to that person?
I think in many ways the reason why I didn't tell anyone what I was doing was less about sort of being fearful or being shy and more about having found as someone who sort of fell into writing stories a little bit accidentally. I was a science writer and then really sort of fell into writing fiction when a good friend of mine started running creative writing workshops out of her home, and I just went to be a good friend, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it in a way that I feel like there are not that many activities in my life. I don't know whether this is true for everyone or just for me, but I feel like there aren't that many activities in my life that I love in the moment. Like, I love being with my family. I love those kinds of things I love in the moment. But a lot of the things that I do in my day-to-day life are things where, either you have to do it or you're very glad to have done it when you're done doing it, or you're happy with the
Yeah.
product or whatever. But writing is one of those things that felt like pure joy in the moment. And I think when I discovered that for the first time, I wanted to hold this thing that was just mine and let it be just mine for a little while. I don't know if that sounds selfish or but I think that was the reason why I sort of held it close and kept it all to myself for a little while. So, and probably a little bit of fear too, but
Yeah.
mostly it was about guarding this precious thing that I kind of fallen in love with.
Yeah. That's so great. Thank you for sharing that. Before we go, can you tell us maybe something you're working on right now or something that's going to be coming out in the near future? And then also, if readers have more questions for you, where's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So in terms of what I'm working on right now, that's a really good question, and I don't actually have an answer for you. I have a book. My second book, Nothing Else But Miracles, came out in September. So I've been having a lot of fun getting to visit schools and bookstores to talk about that one. And have been focused more on sending that baby out into the world than starting a new project. Both of my books so far have been set during World War II, so I kind of feel like I need to figure out how to write a book that isn't set during World War II. So right now I'm kind of messing around with the 1920s and maybe an ocean liner and maybe a pickpocket, but I don't know. I haven't quite figured it out yet. And in terms of where to find me, I'm katealbus.com on the interwebs, and also KE Albus on Instagram. So if people want to find me there, by all means, reach out, say hi.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to link those in the description box so they're really easy for people to find. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this lovely story. I enjoyed it so much. And readers, we will see you again next week for another First Chapter Friday video. Happy reading.
Thank you so much for having me.
To continue reading A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the link in the description box. Then be sure to check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. This week's mystery quote says, "The first words of a new book are so delicious, like the first taste of a cookie fresh from the oven and not yet properly cooled." Thanks so much for visiting my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, teaching tips, direct instruction videos, and more. You can find other resources from me at these places online. I'll see you again next time. Happy reading!